All right, we're going to get started in just 1 minute when the clock strikes the top of the hour here. And while you are waiting, we'd love for you to say hello by dropping your name, role, and location in the chat. So we will do that. And I'm just waiting for the clock to strike the hour. Thank you, Erin from Corvallis, Oregon. All right. Well, welcome. I'm Denise Pope. I am the co-founder and strategic advisor for Challenge Success and a senior lecturer at the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. And just a little tech norms here. We'd love for you to drop your name, role, and location in the chat as folks are coming in. I know we've got a lot of people trying to get into this meeting. And we will be taking questions at the end. The way you're going to do that, if you don't already know and aren't used to these kinds of webinars, is to open up the Q&A button to submit your question. Please don't use the raise your hand. We're not going to be seeing you do that, but we will try to get to everyone's questions at the end. We have a really exciting schedule for this hour and some wonderful speakers. We have a student speaker and we have Lynn Lyons coming. So we will go ahead and get started. I'm wondering, Kristen, if we should go to the next slide or we're still waiting for more people to come in. Okay, here we go. This is another thing that we're going to ask you. If you do want to chat, put something in the chat, we want you to select everyone. Otherwise, it just comes to the host and panelists. We'll look at that if you have something just to say to us, but we'd like you to select everyone. And then again, go ahead and hit the Q&A button for questions. So our mission at Challenge Success, I think some of you know us, but for those of you who are new, our mission is that we partner with school communities to really elevate student voice. They're the ones who are going through this experience. They're the opinions that we think matter very, very much so. And we help implement research-based, equity-centered strategies that improve students' well-being, belonging, and engagement. In fact, those three things are actually our thesis. And if you look at the research around well-being and how we personally define success at Challenge Success, it has to do with engagement, well-being, and belonging. It turns out that a lot of kids are, and parents and adults are motivated by a very narrow vision of success, where success is about grades, it's about test scores, it's about getting into college, it's about how much money you make, how many touchdowns you make, how many soccer goals you score. Instead, we're saying we really want to focus on success that is about being healthy, physically and mentally healthy, that is about feeling like you belong, that you are accepted and valued in a community, that you feel like you can bring all of your authentic identities to school, to your clubs, in your family, that's being honored. And that light of learning is still on in your eyes, that you're truly engaged and excited, you find meaning and purpose in what you're doing, and even joy. So our thesis is that all three of these things go together, they all correlate, and we usually say to schools and parents, pick one to start with, but the other two will be coming along because of that correlation. So that's really what, as we go into thinking about today's topic, we want you to kind of keep this in the back of your head, that we're after a healthy child who feels comfortable in their own skin, who feels like they belong and are welcome in their community and are really excited to learn. And I want to just give a special thanks to everyone who made a contribution when they registered. It is really our pleasure to be able to offer this as a free event today, as part of our commitment to the U.S. Surgeon General, who we've been working with. But if anyone is interested in contributing, we always appreciate contributions. You can make a gift today and you can scan to donate. So thank you to those who did, and thank you to those who still have yet to do that. And finally, I would like to introduce our guest of honor. Lynn Lyons is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. She's been in private practice for 30 years, specializing in the treatment of anxiety disorders. She's written several books and articles on anxiety, including with co-author Reed Wilson, the book called Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents. I have sent this to lots of people, including some of my relatives. She is the host of the podcast Flusterclux, which I love, Flusterclux. And she's also a featured expert in a new documentary, Anxious Nation. Her latest book, The Anxiety Audit, just came out in October, and it's a must read. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Lynn for her conversation.
Thank you, Denise, for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm watching all of the people coming in on the chat, and I'm seeing there's a bunch of New Hampshire people. So hi, New Hampshire people, Massachusetts people too. So I am sitting here in my office in Concord, New Hampshire. I am a New England girl. So thank you for joining me, New Englanders, because the Boston Bruins are playing at 7 o'clock. I shouldn't say that, but it's true. I'm recording it. So hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. We are going to talk tonight, and I'm going to bring up my slides here. I pop in and out of them, but I'm going to start with sharing them. We're going to talk about the very things that Denise was just talking about. How do we create healthy, balanced, I know that's an often used word, but healthy, balanced young people? How do we start as early as possible giving kids, our young kids, our middle schoolers, our teenagers, and then into young adulthood, the skills that they need to move forward to feel successful in that wonderful definition that Challenge Success uses. So let me just dive right in, and remember that we're going to be answering questions. So if you have questions as I go along, just remember to put them in the Q&A, because we'd love to hear from you. Also be prepared. There's going to be a poll question coming up that I'd love to have everybody answer. So I am an anxiety specialist. I work in the anxiety world. It's a good business to be in these days if you want steady work. We've all heard a lot about it. And one of the things that's really important to me as I'm talking about anxiety is, how do we normalize this thing? How do we have definitions of it that sort of move away from a lot of the diagnostic categories that my field uses, and just use language that resonates with all of us who are going through our days, trying to get stuff done, figure out how the world works, growing, maturing, having relationships. And when we think about anxiety, this is how I talk about it. If we think about anxiety as demanding certainty and comfort, what that means is that that anxious part of us wants to know exactly what's going to happen. It wants to feel comfortable. The challenge, of course, is that as you move through your life, whatever period of life you are, it's virtually impossible to pull this off. Being able to tolerate not knowing exactly what's going to happen, being able to recognize that feeling a level of discomfort as you move into new things is absolutely normal. I couldn't do my job without the two words, of course. So if you're listening to this as a parent, if you're listening to this as an educator, I want you to use those two words liberally. Of course. Of course you're feeling stressed about this. Of course you're feeling sad because your heart just got broken. Of course you're feeling frustrated because you weren't able to do the thing you wanted to do. Of course you feel disappointed because when things don't go the way that we planned, when things don't go the way that we hope, we have all of these feelings. And one of the things that I've been talking about a lot recently is this phrase that I've been using, this term that I've been using, emotional hypochondria. And what I mean by that, and we don't even use the term hypochondria anymore in the psychology world. We talk about somatization disorders, but we all know what that means. It means that we're overreacting to something. And one of the things that's so important is that the message that we give our young people is that having a range of feelings, having a range of difficult feelings, and hopefully wonderful feelings too, is really normal and should be expected. When we get worried about how we're feeling, when we begin to think that we shouldn't be feeling a certain way, when we get really anxious about being anxious, that's when we have to take a step back. As adults, I want there to be a very big sweet spot in the range of things that our young people feel, and in the range of things that we feel as parents, as educators, as therapists. David Barlow, he's retired now, but he ran Boston University's Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders. He defined anxiety as an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of your resources to deal with it. So let me pop out of the share for a moment, because I just want you to see me do this in a bigger way than in that little square. Overestimation of the problem, an underestimation of your resources to deal with it. And when I am talking to kids that are feeling ill-equipped for whatever reason, maybe they're stepping into something new, they're trying to get into a college, they're starting their first job, they're dealing with a social situation or a social environment that feels tricky. When anxiety shows up, anxiety is not about what's really happening. Anxiety is not about what's really happening. Anxiety is about an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of your resources to deal with it. So think about somebody who is terrified of snakes, right? They see a snake, and maybe it's a garter snake. Maybe it's a perfectly harmless snake. Maybe it's not a snake. We don't really have poisonous snakes in New England. There's no rational reason to be afraid of snakes, but we overestimate the danger. And then we underestimate how we're going to manage the situation should a snake show up. We could talk about that in terms of social situations, academic situations. We can talk about it in terms of the physical things we want to do. So we're always working to kind of do this. When we're way out of balance in this way, this is when anxiety takes over. And it's about the stories that we tell ourselves. So we've made this into an emergency, and we've told ourselves that we have no way of dealing with it. The more we do this, the more we pull this back down into reality, and the more that we acknowledge and give ourselves an opportunity to build those skills to deal with it, because that's what maturing and growing is, the more we can get this balance going. So think of this image in your mind going forward, is that when you are feeling overwhelmed, when you are feeling stressed, are you like this? Are you like this? And what do we do to start doing this? How do we start paying attention to getting ourselves a little bit more in balance? So let's think about this. I'm going to pull up this next slide. And here's a question that I'd want you to answer. So we're going to pull up a poll for you to engage in. And very simply, if you're thinking about your ability to get enough sleep, physical activity, and social fun connection, what do you think? Are you lousy at doing that? Do you feel like you're doing it adequately? Are you feeling like it's a priority that happens, you make it a priority and you do it? Do you feel like it's a priority? You know you should do it, but it's still hard to make happen. And I'll just give you a few more seconds to respond. Okay, so I'm liking the fact that lousy is the lowest number for sure. I'm liking that. All right, okay, so I'm pleased with this. This is a pretty good response, because 30% of you, a third of you, feel like it's a priority that happens. And 34% of you feel like it's a priority, you're working on it, but it's still hard to make that happen. That is typical. So this group of people listening have answered in a typical way. But again, I'm pleased that the lousy is way down at 10%. What we want to do when we're thinking about this balance is we want to pay attention to the traps. We want to pay attention to what traps we get caught in order to manage these things. This idea of sleep and physical activity and social connection is going to come up again. So hang tight with that. All right. Now, I don't know how to get rid of this poll. Oh, I do now. There you go. Okay, got it. All right. So the first trap we want to pay attention to, these are things that actually make it harder for you to feel in balance. These are the ways that, in particular, anxiety and its pal depression really grab a hold. The first big trap, and these are emotional traps, these are cognitive traps, is the elimination trap. The more you try and get rid of a worried thought, the more you say to yourself, you shouldn't feel that way, you shouldn't think that way, the stronger it gets. There is a phrase in this business that I'm in. I didn't come up with it. It's been around for a really long time. What you resist persists. And one of the things that I see happening a lot, even in my field, well, actually, particularly in my field, is that we're offering a lot of things to kids. They're offering a lot of strategies, a lot of tools. I hear that all the time, coping strategies, toolbox, that are really delivering the message is that you should get rid of those things. You shouldn't be feeling this way, that there's something wrong with you if you're feeling this way. And again, I remind you that there is a very big sweet spot of normal behavior. Things like, for example, elimination strategies would be distraction, for example, which is very often talked about as a way to manage anxiety. The problem with distraction is that it sends the message that I shouldn't be feeling and thinking these ways. I see a lot of advice to young people that if you're feeling really upset about something, if you're feeling distressed about something, you should do something to distract yourself. Now, distraction is not all bad. There are times when you're stuck on something. We actually call it sticky brain. If you're kind of the person who goes over things and over things, I prefer the term unhook to the term distraction. Because when I'm talking about distraction, when I'm thinking about that, it's got too much of a, oh, I can't think that. I've got to get rid of that. And remember, with worry and anxiety, the more we try and push it out of the way, the more that we say that we shouldn't respond that way, we shouldn't feel that way, the stronger it gets. When we talk about unhooking, here's the key distinction that I want to make. The thought comes up. And maybe it's a thought of, oh, I'll never get this done, or, oh God, this is so stressful, or you're feeling a little out of balance, right? This is so terrible and I'll never be able to manage it. Instead of saying, oh, I shouldn't think that way, I want you to acknowledge it. I want you to say, you know what, based on the situation I'm in right now, of course I feel this way. This is a normal reaction to the circumstances that I'm dealing with, but I don't have to ruminate about it. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to go over and over it. And what I also don't have to do is I don't have to tell myself that I shouldn't be having these thoughts or feelings. That's where the emotional hypochondria sort of comes in, right? Like, why am I feeling this way? There's something wrong with me. I don't want to pathologize the feelings and emotions and reactions and difficulties that we have. I want to make room for them. So a distraction, we're going to replace distraction with unhook. It is perfectly fine to say, you know what, I'm done thinking about this for now. I'm going to go do something fun. Or here comes that thought. I don't really need to get invested in that thought or get absorbed in that thought. It's really fine for me to just sort of pivot, to just sort of unhook from it. So that's the first trap that we want to pay attention to. The second trap that we want to pay attention to is the very compelling perfection trap. The thing about perfectionism, as most people know, is that it's really hard to achieve. I say this all the time. I was talking to a little kid years ago and I said, do you think you're a perfectionist? And he said, not yet. I thought, oh, you poor little muffin. When we get caught up in the perfection trap, what we tell ourselves is that it is an all or nothing situation that we're in. So either we do it perfectly or we are going to fail. This culture that we live in, particularly if you are in a high achieving environment, particularly if you're in a high achieving high school, high achieving community, we love perfection. That's just the truth. When we are helping students deal with all of the things that life throws at them, the problem is that we have created a system, and this is why Challenge Success is so good, because they're really questioning this system. They're really pushing back against this system. But we are creating a system that promotes perfectionism. And a lot of people will say that that's not the case, but it's absolutely the case. And our kids know it. Students know it. They feel it. What we want to do when we're dealing with kids in high achieving environments is we want to give them alternatives to this perfectionism. The problem is that if you say to kids that are in high achieving environments, you know what, it's fine for you to fail. It's okay for you to make mistakes. They tend to not believe us. They tend to dismiss us. The reason is because that's not really the way it works and they know it. So if we're talking about what are the skills that we can teach somebody who gets caught up in this perfectionism, here are the two key skills that I teach. One is the ability to cut corners when it's possible to cut corners. So instead of thinking that you have to do everything, instead of thinking that you have to get everything done, it is a really great skill to figure out and to differentiate what is something that I really don't need to do in this situation. Where can I let something go? You know, in graduate school, there was an enormous amount of reading. I did not do all the reading in graduate school. I don't know that anybody does all the reading in graduate school. The other skill we want to teach also is the ability, which is closely related to cutting corners, is the ability to coast when it's possible to coast. The ability to recognize that right now I'm at a period of time where maybe it is okay for me to take the foot off the gas. Maybe it's okay for me to just sort of slide a little bit. If you are a senior in high school and you have already gotten into the school you want to go to, or you already decided what your path is going to be after high school, it is really okay for you to coast a little bit right now. And one of the things that we get caught up in as we're in this perfectionistic environment is comparing ourselves to other people, of deciding that if other people are working hard, that we need to work as equally hard, even when it's not necessary. These are the skills of differentiation that I learned from my mentor, whose name is Michael Yapko. And I will tell you, they are life-changing when you give yourself permission. You don't have to say that it's all or nothing. It's not perfection versus failure. Where can you look for those opportunities to step back a little bit, to coast a little bit, to get your breath, to get your footing? Hugely, hugely important, and a wonderful skill to develop to stay out of that perfectionism trap. All right, the next skill that we want to pay attention to is the internally focused trap. Now, one of the things that's interesting, as a therapist, people think that I'm really into talking about feelings all the time, that we really have to go in, that you have to analyze yourself. People say, oh, you're a therapist, what are you, analyzing me? Generally, I'm not, because I don't do that all the time in every setting that I'm in. But one of the things that is interesting when we're talking about being internally focused and analyzing ourselves and thinking about ourselves is that that's exactly what anxiety and depression do. Anxiety and depression are referred to as the internalizing disorders, which means that there's a lot of things out in the world that can make us anxious, that can make us depressed, for sure, right? There are things that happen to us traumatically. There are certain situations that are very stressful. But the way this thing becomes a disorder and the way this thing sort of goes inside and sets up shop is based on what we do on the inside. Anxiety, remember, anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of your resources to deal with it. And what that means is that it's the story that you're telling yourself about what's going on out here that is the most problematic. Not to say there aren't things that are difficult and challenging and hard to deal with, but how it is that you go in and have a meeting with you about what's happening, that's where people get stuck. So the opposite of that, if we're talking about internally focused and being focused on your feelings, is how do we engage you with things on the outside? How do we talk about or amplify, actually is the best word to use, how do we talk and amplify with action the things that we can do to connect us with other people? One of the things that's interesting is that when we look at the research about being internally focused, when we look at the research about people who are disconnected from things that are going on outside of them or around them, those people have lower rates of well-being. And in fact, volunteerism, doing what we refer to as meaningful work, is one of the things that is key to people, including teenagers, recovering from depression. So one of the, you may have heard this saying before when we talk about depression and anxiety, we say, you are not the best person to talk to you about you. And what we mean by that is that the more that you are in your own closed loop, the more that you are believing your interpretations of events, the more that you are thinking about you and going inside of you, the more that you are inhibiting what's really important social connection. What's really external connection and external focus. I say to kids all the time, look, you're driving your bus, you're driving the bus of life. Your emotions are going to be passengers. They're going to be sitting back there. I do not want your emotions to be driving the bus. And I want you to be looking out in front of you so that you can see what's coming while you're driving the bus. Worry and rumination are two very internally focused states. And when we talk about worry and rumination are both referred to as repetitive negative thinking. And these are absolutely a part of worry, a part of anxiety, a part of stress. Worry tends to take us into the future. So when we're worrying about something, we're worrying, oh, what if this happens? We're actually rehearsing for something that's not happening. We're preparing for something that's not happening. We're playing it out in our minds. We're going through it as if it's happening. That's what worry is. Rumination tends to take us backwards in time. So in particular, people who are socially anxious tend to ruminate. They think about things that they've already done. Oh, did I say the wrong thing when I met that person? She had a weird look on her face. Did I do something that was offensive? They worry, they ruminate about decisions that they've already made, and they worry about decisions that they might make in the future. Worry and rumination are absolutely internally focused. Even if you're worrying about something outside of yourself, it is an inside job. People who worry and ruminate are far more likely to be anxious, and rumination, in particular in women, which is what the research shows, this is a huge risk factor for developing depression. You are closed off, you are inside yourself, you're doing things inside that actually promote the development of anxiety and depression. So what do you do instead? Well, if we're talking about solutions to this, one of the things we want to pay attention to, as I said, is the external connection. How do you get yourself out of your own thinking? How do you get yourself out of your own head? The other thing we want to pay attention to is asking how questions versus why questions. Now, why questions are interesting, right? Like, why does the sun rise? Or why is the sky blue? Or why does my, why does my cat make that weird noise when he's looking out the window and sees birds, right? Why questions. But when we're talking about emotional management, when we're talking about breaking out of these habits of worry and rumination, why questions don't tend to be very helpful. The reason being is that that's a lot of people, when they're anxious, when they're stressed, when they're worried, they ask why questions in a way that's really self-critical. Sometimes we do this with parenting, and sometimes we do this with our partners. We ask those why questions, and they come across as, why did you do that dumb thing? Why can't you figure this out? Why does this always happen to me? We tend to ask those why questions, but we actually don't answer them. If we shift from why to how, then we are moving into a more activated state. It's how questions promote solutions. So if I were to say, why do I always screw up? Or why do I always forget to floss my teeth in the morning, right? That's self-critical. What am I going to say? I don't know. I'm a loser. I'm careless. I don't care about my teeth. But if I start asking how questions, how can I come up with something that will help me floss my teeth more often? How can I say it's a social question, right? Why do I always say stupid things? Or why doesn't anybody want to have a conversation with me? If we begin to ask how questions, how can I be more open when I walk into a room? I was just talking to a kid the other day he said he was doing some self-reflection. He's a high school student, and he was saying that he really thinks he walks around with this kind of angry face all the time. He's not angry. He says he's very internally focused. He's overthinking things. His expression on his face isn't one of anger, but it is one of internal focus. And so the question becomes, how can I walk through the halls with a more open face? How can I remind myself to put a smile on my face so that people are willing to engage with me rather than thinking like, oh God, that guy's kind of a jerk. When we ask how questions, it opens up solutions and possibilities. How is an active, engaged word. Why tends to be a word of curiosity, but when we're talking about emotional management, when we're talking about anxiety and depression, it tends to be a lot more self-critical. This may be surprising coming from somebody who has been a therapist for 33 years, because we have a reputation of sort of asking those why questions, but it's not the way that we want to be activated and move forward. So that's a really good, helpful tip of being able to move out of the why and into the how. All right, let's see what's next here. Oh, okay. The busyness and multitasking trap. So we have the elimination trap. We have the internally focused trap. We have the perfection trap, and we have the busyness and multitasking trap. One of the things, just like perfectionism, our culture really, really applauds, admires busyness. In fact, it's kind of become, not kind of, it truly is sort of the new humble brag, that when you are busy, when you are stressed out, adults do this all the time, you know, oh my gosh, we see each other. How are you doing? Oh, so crazy. Life is so busy. Just listen to this around you. If you walk into a situation, if you're going to the movies and you run into a friend, listen to how often around you hear people talking about how busy, how crazy their lives are. Oh, the kids, it's so crazy. The kids, oh my gosh, I can hardly keep up, right? I mean, we're doing 4 activities, and I've got one daughter doing gymnastics and the other daughter is doing ice skating, and my son is engaged in robotics, and right, oh, it's so busy. You cannot do cognitively more than one activity that requires thinking at a time. Back in the 80s, when technology sort of started moving into things, and there were the first car phones, and we figured, oh my gosh, we could really take advantage of this technology to be able to multitask. You could take a course in business school. If you were getting your MBA, you could take a course in multitasking. They were really trying to figure out, how can we really juice this thing up? Well, the cognitive scientists were sort of like, we probably should check in on this. And what they found is that we don't multitask if we're doing cognitive things. You can ride your bike and think about something. When you're running, you can think about something and come up with great ideas, but you cannot do 2 cognitive tasks at once. What you will be doing is task switching, but you will not do multitasking. This is something to think about, because I know for a fact that a lot of people think, okay, so I can have this screen up and I can be paying attention to this, and I can be trying to write this paper while I'm also paying attention to the notifications coming in on my phone. It doesn't work. Task switching, in fact, is incredibly inefficient. So what the research shows is that if you are trying to get something done while you're multitasking, it's actually going to take you up to 4 times longer to complete one of those tasks than it would if you were just focused on that single task without all of the other distractions around you. If you are engaged in something, say you're trying to write a paper, say you're trying to finish some project for school, and you are interrupted, so you go and you answer an email or you start looking at your Snapchat, it takes a little over 23 minutes for you to get fully re-engaged in that task you were doing before you switch to the other task. So think about that. If you're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, this is a recipe for intellectual inefficiency, which means that you're working harder than you have to work, that things are taking longer than they have to take. And when we look at what takes up our time and what we want to be able to do with our time, multitasking and busyness is the most inefficient way that you can go about getting things done. All right, so now we have the catastrophic trap. The catastrophic trap is sort of the meat of the sandwich of anxiety, because anxiety loves to go to the worst case scenario, and that's what catastrophic thinking is. So when we're thinking about worry, when worry shows up, worry says, okay, so you've got this event coming up, or you've got this test you have to take, or you've got this problem you need to solve. Let's just spend a little time thinking about the horrible way that it could go. Now, lots of times people will say, well, you know, that's helpful. If I think about the worst that could happen, if I think about the bad thing that could happen, that helps with my problem solving. Not necessarily. Thinking about the worst thing that could happen, thinking about the bad thing that could happen, actually inhibits your ability to engage in the thing that you're trying to engage with, because the catastrophic movie that you are playing in your head actually fires off the part of your brain that is your fight or flight response. So say you're getting ready to take a test and you're sitting there and you're preparing and you're thinking, oh my God, what if I fail this test, right? Oh God, what would happen, right? Again, here we are here, overestimating the problem, underestimating your resources to deal with it. You are playing a movie in your head that is taking your brain to a catastrophic place that is not based in reality. That is what gets all those physical symptoms going, right? When we have those big anxious reactions, when our body gets all worked up, it's because our brain believes, our primitive brain believes that something bad is actually happening. So if you are a catastrophizer, if as a parent, you're a catastrophic parent, which means you think or talk a lot about the worst that could happen, you need to differentiate that from problem solving. Catastrophic thinking is not problem solving. Catastrophic thinking is imagining bad things. You're torturing yourself with the outcome of a movie that you don't want to watch. So think about that. Here's what you're also going to do. You're going to get rid of, forevermore, you're going to get rid of the phrase, what's the worst that could happen? Because that's when anxiety says, oh, I've got this. Hello. We say that as a way to sort of help. What's the worst that could happen? And anxiety says, let me help you imagine that. What we want to say instead is we want to say, are you overestimating the problem and underestimating your resources? And how can we get that into balance? And then the other thing that we want to say is, how are you creating a narrative? How are you creating a story about this that is going to get in the way of you stepping in and taking reasonable risk? People who catastrophize don't take reasonable risk. All right, so let me talk very quickly about the permanence trap. When we're talking about the permanence trap, we're talking about thinking that things can't change. If there is one message that I want to give to all of you as you're listening to this, the permanence trap is the place where our young people go when they begin to see their struggles as unchangeable, when we begin to identify with a diagnosis, when we begin to believe, whoever is telling us this, that this is who we are and that we are not changeable. Our brains are incredibly malleable, incredibly malleable. The permanence of believing that you can't change is exactly what anxiety and depression want you to believe. And I want you to replace that with this phrase: my brain is more malleable than I could possibly imagine. You are always changing. Even if you wanted to stay the same, it wouldn't be possible. So I want you to pay attention to whether or not you are thinking about yourself in a permanent or changeable way. And I want you to really pay attention, just as the question that I asked at the beginning. How are you getting these things in your life? These are the basics. This is mental health. This is wellness, sleep, paying attention to screens, getting sunlight in your eyeballs, moving your body, and engaging in meaningful activities with other people. That's what I want you to pay attention to. All right, I'm done. I see you, Denise.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my goodness, Lynn. It's so great to hear you. I learn something every time. You're so practical. You're so easy to understand. And I want to bring up Cameron Grimes, who's going to really help us put this into perspective with a student perspective. So Cameron, why don't you go ahead and show your beautiful face? Hello.
Hi,
Nice
Cameron.
to see you. Cameron, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. I know you're a high school senior at Salesian College Prep here in California, and I want to know a little bit, how does what you hear today, how does anxiety show up for either you or your peers? Talk to us.
I feel like anxiety has been cropping up a lot for my peers, especially as we're approaching the end of the school year. And especially for us seniors, it's a lot of pressure as far as this college decision time and feeling like we have to have everything set in stone right now. And so I feel like this is kind of shown through the feeling of lack of motivation that we're all sharing. I can kind of just feel it and sense it around me. A lot of us are beginning to shut down. And I think this just kind of leads into the inability to have open discussions about what the true cause of this stress is. And so without conversation, I think things won't change much.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can see that, and I see that with my own kids when they were seniors as well. So what is something you heard? Lynn had some talk about that, even mentioned this senior year kind of thing. What's something you heard that you wish others at your school would hear?
One thing I wish that other kids at my school heard is that you don't need to know or be sure of everything right now. I think it's just a common misconception for us all to have that we have to have things, laid out. We have to have a career plan and process and know how we're going to achieve that. But I think we all know it's not that simple, and I don't think it ever will be. So I think it's just important to not get caught up in comparison, like Miss Lyons said earlier, and just knowing and being comfortable and confident in what you have going on, but also remembering that sometimes not being fully sure can widen your own opportunities and leave you with an open mind to new possibilities.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? And also maybe like, hey, seniors, it's okay to coast. Like you've put in the time, you've got that decision. Maybe we can take the foot off the gas a little bit, as Lynn said.
Yeah.
I love that
Cameron,
point.
I wouldn't worry too much about your lack of motivation right now.
Yeah,
I would sort of roll with that, right? I mean, you have worked hard. All of you guys have worked hard. Yeah. I like this idea of you guys being able to say, you know what? We don't have to know everything right now. We've worked hard. And this is a time for us to kind of enjoy the ending of our high school career and all of the social stuff that goes with it, right? You've earned that time.
I know that, and we're going to get to this scenario in a second, but I know that some students hear, well, if your grades go way down, the college will hear that and it will revoke your admission, right? Or whatever post-secondary track you're doing, something might occur that it'll revoke it. But they're talking about very dramatic, right? A little bit of foot off the gas, I think, and really, really to enjoy would be good. I would like all high school students to do this, right? And not just at the senior year, and to really learn, like you said, what that balance is. So Cameron, last question for you before we go to a little scenario for the audience to weigh in on. What changes have you personally, or maybe your school made to reduce pressure or stress? I know your school's been working with Challenge Success for a while now. So what have you done or your school done?
So the last few years or so, we actually created this wellness center, and I'm sitting literally right across from it right now. So it's actually lovely. I use it myself sometimes. We can say we're just having a moment, we're at a bit of a state of emotional pressure, and we just can't sit through class and just get through it anymore. We can tell our teacher, go down to the office, and this is a safe space for us to be in for 15 minutes to just calm down. You're in there by yourself. They have some little things you can fiddle around with to kind of get your mind off things, but it's really just a center of safe space and wellness, like it's called a wellness center. And I've used it to actually kind of develop my own habits and organizational skills. So something else I've done recently in that wellness center, I came up with like a color-coded organizational scheme that I feel like really helps alleviate the stress and pressure of my everyday schedule. So I'll put all my school assignments in my phone on the calendar app under yellow. I'll put in family events under green and things of that nature, appointments in red. And I just feel like this helps with the physical and visually seeing that all these different things I have to do. And it just feels like it's weighing on me. And when it's all color coded, it looks nice, helps me do it.
Well, that's actually a strategy, Cameron. Global thinking is one of the things that's a real risk factor for anxiety and depression. It means that you throw everything into the same basket and you get overwhelmed. And one of the ways that we teach people to manage that is to break things down into parts and to be able to differentiate between this and this and this, so that this technique that you've come up with, right? The way this is recorded. I was like, I wish I could record you saying this. It was just so lovely to hear you say that, because you're saying, I can look at it. It looks nice. It's manageable. I've got it in my head. That's exactly what parts thinking is compared to global thinking. Yeah, fantastic.
Yes. There's nothing like being able to check or delete one of those things over there. I mean, it's the best feeling in the world. It feels like it's amazing.
That's right.
It's how we solve problems anyway, right? You need to break it down. Otherwise, it's too big for anything. I think we model that as educators with our students as well. So that's lovely. So we want to put the audience, get the audience participation in here. And I know those of you signed on and are just listening and maybe cooking dinner and whatnot. this is just a quick poll. Okay, we're gonna play out a scenario. This is actually from real life, and I want you to think about this. Everyone in the audience, you are a student who is worried about your high school friend. Your friend shared with you confidentially that they've been blowing off school assignments, they quit their favorite school club, and they started drinking their parents' alcohol. They said that you are the one person they can trust and that their parent will freak out if they find out about any of this. Yesterday, your friend also told you that they hate their life. You're really worried about them and you want to help, but you're not sure what to do or where to turn. So I want you to think about this, and we're going to give you some options in a poll of what you might do as a student. Now, if you're an adult, I want you to think like a student here. Would you keep this information confidential? Would you tell a trusted adult? Would you talk to your peer group to get advice? So if you are a student, answer what you would do. If you're an adult, let's answer what you hope the students will do. We're seeing the votes come in here.
Mm-hmm.
We'll share these with you in a minute. It's kind of unanimous here. All right, thank you for voting. So it looks like if there's students in the audience, but I know there's a lot of adults, we want you to tell a trusted adult. We want you to tell a trusted adult. So let's kind of have Lynn and Cameron weigh in here. And Cameron, let's start with you. You're a student. I don't know if something like this has happened to you before, but what's your go-to there?
Honestly, I think it's very easy to say and expect to first straight go to this trusted adult, because that probably is the best thing to do and how it should go in the end. But personally, I think before I jump to that step, because that friend came to me out of trust, I might try to go to a peer group of friends and discuss the matter, but in a confidential sense. Don't tell them about what's going on with this exact friend, but kind of give it to them in a scenario type of situation and see what they think. But I think based on how I'm able to assess that person's feelings, and like you said, they came back the next time and said that they hate their life, I think that that would prompt me to think it's a serious matter and that I need to act now. And so I would look for a trusted adult, or maybe even a school counselor. We have a lovely one here who I would feel completely safe telling and going to about my friends. And I don't think they would not appreciate that. They really respect him and like him. So I think that that would be how I would handle that matter.
Even though, I mean, it's really hard, right? They're saying this is confidential. So I get why that wouldn't be your first go-to, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I like the instincts there. Lynn, talk to us. What do you think?
Yeah, so I agree. I think that's a very good piece of advice, Cameron, that you're saying in terms of the way you're looking at this. And I would say that as the adults that are listening, is that if you are the trusted adult, your job then is to not overreact or underreact. Your job is to listen. Your job is to empathize. You know, one of the things when kids are struggling, when they're feeling all these big feelings, if somebody comes to you with a problem to solve, the first thing you want to do is listen. You want to let them say what they have to say, and you don't want to freak out. One of the reasons that when we talk to kids about, well, why didn't you talk to an adult about this? They say, oh, because they were just going to totally freak out. Mm-hmm. They couldn't put it in perspective. They're going to lose their mind. And so as adults, we, even if on the inside, you're kind of freaking out, you've got to be that steady presence. You've got to listen. You've got to problem solve and not overreact. That's the thing that shuts kids down a lot in terms of going to a trusted adult, for sure.
I think, you know, I hear I hate my life, and some kids say that like all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, they use a swear word mm-hmm. and, you know, it's like FML on a text, mm-hmm. right? But so how do you know, like, when should we really worry? When is it appropriate to take like that action of, hey, this is really serious? Mm-hmm. Is it when they're saying I hate my life? Is it something around the other things in the scenario? This is a kid who is blowing off assignments, quit their favorite club, and started drinking their parents' alcohol. Yeah. What do you think, Lynn?
So certainly the alcohol would be the thing that would get my attention the most, right? So they're turning to substances, they're starting to self-medicate. That's a real big red flag. Say the alcohol thing wasn't in it, right? Say that was removed. The thing that I'm paying attention to is whether or not this this teenager is starting to disconnect from the places of connection and belonging and support. So not seeing friends, quitting their favorite club. If we see a kid not going to school, as soon as we see a real sort of rupture in the social connection and the social support, that's when we want to pay attention for sure.
Yeah. So just to help us out with some language, and Cameron, feel free to weigh in. What should a kid say to this kid? What should the go-to line be? Cameron, you gave a little hint of you would listen first. What would you say? I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
I know, I'm like, what would I say? I always try to come from a place of understanding, empathy, and compassion. And so I would kind of try to dive more into like figuring out why do they feel this way, and trying to help them understand why, but also kind of pushing them to understand that they need to share this with someone else, and that can help kind of appreciate that they came to me and make them feel comfortable and rewarded for doing so that they can feel comfortable enough to do that elsewhere with an adult.
Beautiful. Yeah. Lynn, go ahead.
And I think if you ask that why are you feeling this way, right? Perfectly reasonable question to ask, but what if they say, I don't know, or who knows, or I just feel this way? Then that's when those how questions become helpful. So you say, how can I help? How can I offer support? You say, here's what's concerning me most, that you're disconnecting from us, and you've got this group of friends, or you've got these people in school, and we really care about you, and we're noticing that there's something not quite right. How can we help? And that is an active, right? You're saying, we're going to do something, we're going to problem solve. Now, sometimes they might say, you know what I really just need is for you to listen. And you go, I'm all ears. Or you might say, what I need is blah, blah, blah. So if you ask those how questions, sometimes they'll present a solution to you, and then we figure it out. But I'm just going to focus on that connection. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I really pick up on what you just said is sometimes they really do want you just to listen. And my kids are really good now at saying, by the way, this is not, I don't want you to solve this. Mom, just listen. Don't jump in, because they know, like, I'm a solver. Like you said, we're solvers. This is what we do. We're educators. We're clinicians. Don't jump in. Close your mouth. Just let me vent. Let me listen. It's really, really key.
Yep.
I am mindful of time, and I know that we have some questions from the Q&A. So let's go ahead and dig into some of those. All right. I'm looking here. How does one practice a sense of detachment from others around you, colleagues, family that may not be able to manage their anxiety well, not let their anxiety, depression rub off on you? This sort of contagion thing, Lynn?
Yeah.
I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I love this question, because one of the things that I talk about a lot is that when we look at anxiety and depression, putting it into this sort of individual or even biomedical model really loses track of the fact that we are above all social and emotional beings. So we want to, the person who's asking this question is saying, it really feels like it's contagious. It is contagious. We know that based on who we hang out with and the attitude and the emotions that people are experiencing, we can get caught up in that. So one of the things that you can do is, we hear that word boundaries a lot. I think that's sometimes people are a little too, draconian with their boundaries, but it really is okay for you to just be very clear with somebody and to say, oh, you know what, when you are stressed, I care about you so much, I can't help but absorb it. Or when you're feeling so depressed, it sort of is setting the tone. And then again, you ask that how question. How can I help you move out of that? Now, if that person wants nothing to do with this conversation, then you can imagine, like, what's a reasonable distance that I need to put between myself and that other person? Do you not respond to all of their texts? Is it okay for you to not have conversations with them after a certain time at night? Are there certain topics? I don't know if you are familiar with Esther Perel, but she says in some relationships, there are certain things that you should just never talk about. And that is totally fine. So if you're dealing with somebody that you feel like is open to having a conversation about the way that their emotions or the way that their patterns are affecting you, absolutely bring that up if it's somebody that you're close to. If it's somebody that that's not your role, it is perfectly fine for you to just be polite, to just be friendly, to just be civil, but maybe say that this relationship isn't really something that I'm going to get absorbed in. It's compelling for sure, but the more you can sort of pull back, the better.
Thank you. Okay, next question, because we're trying to get to some of these. Are there resources that put these great points into like language for teens? And one particular question around that is like, what do you say to a student who's really stuck in ruminating thoughts and stories?
Yeah. So the language, the thing that I'm going to do, first thing is I'm going to externalize this worry. One of the things that my mentor taught me is the skill of all skills is the ability to step back from your thinking long enough to observe and interpret it. So when we're talking to kids and they're sort of caught up in things, even just saying, let's take a step back for a moment. And and people say like, well, teenagers do this. Yeah, I do it with teenagers all the time. Let's personify this. Let's give it a name. Let's use some humor. Let's call it Sylvia. And let's notice that when you're stressed out, what does Sylvia say? How does Sylvia make you feel? So it's really as early as possible. We want to do this with kids and then with teenagers, the ability to step back and recognize your patterns. Worrying and ruminating is a contagious pattern. And if you have a kid that worries and ruminates, you got to pay attention to what you're modeling, because we know this thing runs in families.
Yeah. No, so good. Okay, another question is, and this is sort of sad, what if the trusted peer group went to the trusted adult regarding the depressed friend, and then the trusted adult never follows up with the peer group? And I think the trusted adult might have followed up with the friend, right? Let's assume sort of best practice there. But then what happens to the peers? They're still wondering and worried. What happens there?
So persistence is sometimes an important thing to recognize when we're dealing with things like this. And when you are trying to help someone, if you're trying to help somebody break a pattern of something, very rarely is it a one and done. We wish that were the case, that we could have this one conversation, that we could go to the adult one time and then everything will be okay. So as a teenager, as a young person who's working on relationships, it's really important to just normalize the fact that you might have to say the same thing over and over again. You might have to follow up. It's being what my dad used to call a polite pest. That's what he used to say when you were, trying to get a job. It is okay for young people to go back to that trusted adult. Also, it's really important if that trusted adult is not getting the job done, then go to somebody else. But the goal is not to give up, and the goal is not to think that just one and done. It really is about persistence and being a polite pest and showing up over and over and over again, which is hard for kids to do, but it really is very helpful.
I know it puts a lot on the kids.
It does.
For sure. But it's also, I think, a really good lesson in how you maintain a relationship with a friend.
Yeah.
Okay, these two kind of go together. Are there more ways that students in high achieving schools can resist the implicit and explicit message that they get from peers and teachers, et cetera, that they have to get all A's, take all these APs, et cetera, to be successful? And how do you help a perfectionist or overachiever reduce the amount of commitments that are really self-inflicted?
I will tell you, Denise, that I have never met with a family, because I still have a practice, and I don't meet with kids alone in my practice. I meet with parents, but I've never met a parent that comes into my office and says, you know what, we are putting a lot of pressure on our kid, or it is our agenda that our child achieve. I'm sure there are parents out there, but they don't come into my office for help saying that. They all of them say, this is internally driven. We do not put any pressure on our kid, right? We tell them all the time. And it's just not true. And I'm not saying that you are explicitly saying, you need to get all A's, although some families certainly say that. But we have to pay attention to what we praise, what we model, what we celebrate, right? At the end of the year with the academic awards dinners, all of the messaging that they are getting from very early on is that if you achieve, you get the goodies. And that is a hard thing, but parents can really talk very openly about their students and say, look, we are in this environment in which that's kind of the way it is. And for us to pull back from that and for us to change the way that we are dealing with this, we're really kind of going to be outliers. We're going to feel different in this environment. Having open conversations with kids about that too. I think that the biggest impediment to families being able to break out of this cycle, and I know this is going to be hard to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway, is denial that you're in the cycle.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Of saying like, well, it's not us. Yeah.
Right.
It really needs to come from the top down. And it really is okay, even when your kids are little, to say, I am not going to allow you to take 5 AP courses, or in this family, we're not going to do 5 activities. And for parents to really model and set those boundaries starting from an early age. Yeah.
And that is a perfect transition, Lynn. In fact, Kristen, if you don't mind putting up the last slides, because that is what we do a lot with schools and parents, is we do this sort of, how do you take it one step back? How do you, how can we make some changes at schools and in our family environment? This is what Challenge Success does. Everything from parent education, like, you know, if the first thing you say when you walk in the door is, how'd you do on the history test? That might be really well-meaning and you don't think that you're putting pressure on, but that's what they are hearing is the first thing when you walk in the door, the most important thing. So there's lots and lots of parent education workshops that we offer. We work with schools to really change those messages of what gets rewarded. Are we still announcing names of where people are going to college at graduation, right? There's all sorts of things that we can talk to schools about that we do at Challenge Success, including a lot of research and resources on our website. So the very last thing is we want to go ahead and announce upcoming workshops. You can join us on challengesuccess.org. Lots and lots of Facebook, Instagram, all that, Twitter. But we've got some really good, to the point, what's the point of college with Kelly Corrigan coming up. We've got the Well-Balanced Student with lots and lots of information. We have resources. Well-Balanced Child is for parents of younger kids. And as Kristen just put in the chat, everyone on this website webinar right now is going to get some information in their inboxes. Look for that, check your spam on more ways that you can stay connected and really learn more about all the things that you can do. So, you know, we have things that we can do. There's things that we can't control. There's things that we can do as parents and educators and clinicians to really decrease the stress, to really up those positive coping strategies for kids and adults. And Lynn, thank you so much for all that you do. Cameron, I know you're off camera, but we are thanking you for all that you have contributed to this as well. Your opinion and insight was so important, and your gut reaction to how you handled that scenario. And thank all of you for tuning in your busy days to learn how to help kids. So we really appreciate it. We hope everyone has a really nice evening, end of afternoon, Bruins game, and and we hope to see you at another event soon.
Thank you for having me, Denise.
Our pleasure.